Good morning, family. This is Ricky, and welcome to Hope for Today. We're setting our sights on a brand new year with proven practices for a new season, talking about Jesus and these lifelong lessons in the gospel from the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to take us to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5, where the Lord Christ says to you and to me, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Let's look at that again. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The word blessed there, if I remember my Greek New Testament correctly, I believe it's the Greek word makarios, which is the idea of happiness. And Jesus is saying here, happy are those who are meek in spirit. Okay? Now, when we understand rightly what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount, we understand rightly that Jesus is saying, ultimately, this will happen if you are this way. Ultimately, this will happen if you are this way. In other words, Jesus is not saying you'll be happy at first for being meek. If anything, you'll be persecuted. You'll be ridiculed. You'll be criticized by the world because that's just not the world's way of doing things. But Jesus is saying this is the gospel way. And so the gospel promise is this: ultimately, you will be happy if you live this way. Jesus says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Translation, Jesus is saying, if you approach life with a humble spirit as opposed to a prideful and boastful spirit, ultimately, you'll know happiness. That if you enter into your relationships with a lowly spirit and a meek in heart spirit, ultimately your relationships will be happy ones. If you approach your parenting and if you approach your career with a meek and lowly spirit, ultimately there will be happiness for you in your life. Why? Because this is the way of Jesus. And Jesus says famously in the text that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. James said it best when he said, when you enter into a place, don't come and take the most influential spot, but move to the back so that people may acknowledge you and then bring you up when the time is right. It's the whole idea of honoring the gospel by being as humble as you possibly can, trusting that God is the one who promotes. God is the one who advances, that you don't have to clasp and grasp for position yourself, because God knows how to provide, God knows how to promote, and God loves to bless people who are meek and lowly of heart. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And I'm just reminded of that old story that I've told so many times before. But there's a preacher in Mississippi. His name is Reverend Dr. Jerry Watkins. He is an elder statesman preacher, really famous in my neck of the woods. Famous preacher, goes all over the country to preach. However, you may be surprised to know that not one day in his life has he ever flown on an airplane. He's completely terrified of flying, drives everywhere he goes, yet preaches all over the country. So he's almost in a car on a long trip every other day. And this is about 30 years ago now. He's getting ready to preach at a big conference, pastors and preachers all over the place, thousands of people. And the clinician is on the rostrum about to introduce Dr. Jerry. And he, of course, goes through all his accolades and his fanfare. And then he says, now everyone knows that Dr. Watkins is afraid of flying. But does he not understand that the Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth? Dr. Watkins, I know you're coming here to preach, but you ought to start flying so you can be closely with the Lord. And everyone just burst into laughter. Dr. Watkins methodically and calmly climbs up into the lectern and he says, I appreciate my brother preacher for the kind, thoughtful acts and also the wonderful humorous anecdote that he levied to me. It is true, I have a fear of flying. I stay on the ground in my travels because I have read whereby the scriptures have said to us, the Lord saying to the church, and lo, I'll be with you always to the end of the age. And everybody just went crazy because Jerry Watkins got it. And I hope you got all that to hear this, that when Jesus is saying the meek shall inherit the earth, it is his way of saying, when you get low, he'll be with you always. And that's hope for today. I'll see you next time.